wow, did the government really not care about people? They really don't care, you know. And I'm thinking back to, like, you know, the NHS, and we clapped them all for months and they're heroes, and then we just gave them 1% pay rise, not wanting to feed kids, and then our troops just being pulled out like that, which affects us, obviously, and it affects them. And, you know, I've been injured 14 years. I've been trying to stay positive and always try and take the good out of the bad kind of thing. And I've always had in the back of my mind, like, this happened for a reason, because we did this, or we were trying to do that. And all of that's gone. And then, you know, you've got a government talking during the pandemic about being patriotic and, you know, Union Jack flags in the background on your Zoom. And, like, this is what, you know, I mean, look at that. That's what being patriotic looks like. If, you know, you haven't got to go to war, join the force or anything like that. You can just be a kid and teach kids to pick up litter off the ground and do their bit kind of thing and be proud of your country. And, you know, my bit of being patriotic and proud of where I was born, this is where I'm from, was going to war. I mean, war's not just going there killing people or whatever, but you're also trying to help people out.
Build schools.
And,
Well, you help with education, didn't you?
You can build schools, you can send young girls to be educated or whatever, which is great. And I could then say, oh, well, at least if some kids are educated, that's fine. But in today's time now, with what's happened, just walking away, those same girls, can they use their education? No, they've got to burn their certificates in case they get caught out that they've been educated and they're dead.
From 1978, the communist-run Afghan government was fighting an insurgency war against an Islamic group in the north, known as the Mujahideen. The Afghan government was supported by Russia due to its communist ties. Russian support came in the form of its military and finance. The Mujahideen were supported by the United States, who offered them weapons, money, and training. This made the events part of a proxy war, and on a bigger scale part of the Cold War. After a decade of fighting, Russia removed itself from Afghanistan. By the 1990s, groups from the north of Afghanistan had formed a new group known as the Taliban. During the 1990s, the Taliban moved south across Afghanistan, building up their forces. By September 95, they captured the province of Herat, which borders Iran and Tajikistan. By 96, they had captured the capital city of Kabul, removed the government, and moved the capital city from Kabul to the city of Kandahar. By 1998, the Taliban had control of anywhere between 85% and 90% of Afghanistan. The beginning of the Taliban rule in Afghanistan was a difficult one for the Taliban because the economy had been wrecked. In order to control the population, the Taliban used the fear of its military as well as public executions, forced amputations, stoning, banning girls from school, making women second-class citizens by forcing them to wear the burqa, giving them public beatings, and women only being allowed out of the house with a male escort. Men were restricted to a certain type of beard. Even television, music, and cinema were banned. In 1999, Indian flight IC-814 was hijacked and flown into and landed in Kandahar, the Taliban capital. Reports suggested that the Taliban fighters surrounded the aircraft and took the hijackers back to Pakistan. It was the 9/11 attacks that brought the focus of the world back to the Taliban.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime.
The Americans and British believed that the leader of Al-Qaeda committed the terrorist attacks on 9/11 and that he was hiding out in Afghanistan and training troops for more terrorist attacks.
We have absolutely no doubt that bin Laden and his network were responsible for the attacks on the 11th of September.
I am convinced that Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban are guilty as charged.
In October of 2001, a US-led military coalition began an invasion of Afghanistan to remove the Taliban. Within a week, the Taliban government had collapsed, causing Taliban leaders to retreat into nearby countries such as Pakistan. The coalition set up a democracy within the country, and the United States provided funding to the government. The Taliban has a substantial amount of money coming in totaling at about $1.6 billion a year in revenue. This money has been raised in part from selling opium, which is estimated alone to be worth $1 billion a year. The estimate was made by the UN Security Council, and it also estimated that 80% of heroin on the market comes as a result of poppy fields in Afghanistan. They also have mining that brings in a substantial amount of revenue, and in the last couple of years it's been estimated that the Taliban sit on huge resources, totaling somewhere in the region of anywhere between $1 and $3 trillion, including lithium, cobalt, copper, gems, and gold. Some experts believe that there is also uranium. According to US and international sources, the Taliban have also been financed by Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Pakistan.
To meet that goal, we will pursue the following objectives within Afghanistan. We must deny al-Qaeda a safe haven. We must reverse the Taliban's momentum and deny it the ability to overthrow the government. And we must strengthen the capacity of Afghanistan's security forces and government so that they can take lead responsibility for Afghanistan's future.
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
So how have the Taliban been able to beat the United States and its allies? As stated earlier, they've received international funding, they've been able to recruit from the local populace, claiming this is a war against Islam. The protection of the mountains have been significantly, historically, difficult, and no different for the US. There's been protection within Pakistan, and it's a very grey area as to discuss the borders of Afghanistan. The borders drawn up by the British in the early 1900s were not based on tribal lines, but on guesswork. These borders are now covering areas that have cut tribal groups in half. This has meant that people of various tribes have been moving between Pakistan and Afghanistan for decades through mountain passes without hindrance. Therefore, there's been resistance to any change, making it difficult to protect and creating sympathy for the Taliban fighters. I want to say a big thanks to my friend Simon over at his channel Track Record for doing some of the animations for this video. He has some great UK and global political videos, including a documentary on occupied Cyprus as well as the Taliban. I've left links in the description.
The Taliban remains a very powerful, lethal fighting force that has been fighting for the last 20 years. The people who have been in government, the Afghan National Army, things like places like that, have simply not been as battle-hardened as these Taliban warriors. And so there's a military point and then there's a political point. The Taliban do represent some part of a disgruntled Pashtun population of Afghanistan that does not recognize the government of Afghanistan as legitimate, views this as the remnants of the old Northern Alliance, and so is fighting very hard. So those two features, military effectiveness and a real political cause, have combined to produce a situation where you can't really defeat the Taliban, and the Taliban is doing pretty well on the battlefield.
The withdrawal from Afghanistan began in October 2014, following the killing of al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden by US Special Forces. It was announced that British personnel would gradually return home, and the vast majority of British combat troops left Afghanistan in October 2014, with Cambastian handed over to Afghan forces. This is General Nick Carter, appointed to the position of the General Staff in 2014, and stayed in that position for over 3 years and 279 days until the 11th of June 2018. Considering the issues that are clearly being seen as of 2021, it is surprising that he stayed in that position for over 3 years. In 2018, Secretary Pompeo, under the Trump administration, met with the Taliban political deputy and released him from prison. You can now see him in the top right hand corner, now inside the Afghanistan presidential palace, leading the Taliban fight. This is Sir Mark Charlton Smith. He is the current Chief of the General Staff for the United Kingdom, that is the head of the British Army. He was put in place in June 2018. He has been there now for 3 years and 68 days and yet has not offered his resignation in regards to the debacle that is taking place in Afghanistan in 2021. nor has anyone asked for him to be fired. On February 29, 2020, the United States and the Taliban signed a peace agreement in Doha. The Afghan government was not invited to these peace talks. The Americans agreed to withdraw within 14 months. In April 2021, President Biden, taking over from the peace deal that was created by the Trump administration, decides to withdraw from Afghanistan and claims to have consulted with allies. This was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking. We were attacked, we went to war with clear goals, we achieved those objectives, and it's time to end the war forever. I find this interesting as a speech because these objectives are the ones that have been achieved, yet we know from a speech made by Ian Duncan Smith and backed by Tony Blair that one of the key objectives was to completely rid ourselves of the Taliban. This has not been achieved. In fact, this is the complete opposite. They have been reinstated in power and everyone is dithering as to whether or not they should be allowed to stay in that position. We can see a number of issues already taking place, including the reduction in the number of overseas troops in the United States, and interestingly, pro-Trump senior Republicans, including Senate Mitch McConnell, have said this plan is a mistake. Whilst there was a withdrawal in troops, there was an escalation in the number of weapons released in airstrikes in Afghanistan. According to Statista and to the New York Times, coalition forces are now killing more civilians than the Taliban in 2019. And in April of 2021, CIA Director William Burns stated there is a significant risk once the US military and coalition military's withdrawal, but added the US would retain a suite of capabilities.
Problems were clearly escalating and reports were coming out through Western media of issues taking place in Afghanistan with the Afghani military.
Well, we weren't expecting it to come this soon. So there hasn't really been a proper transition. It has helped in one way, but also put us at risk in others. We had to expedite self-reliance and self-sufficiency with our security forces at a much faster pace than what we were preparing for.
And the risk?
The Taliban could see this as an opportunity and attack us like they did, and think that they could overrun a couple of provinces and put us in a situation where it may be hard for us to take them back.
Has American troops pulling out made your ability to protect civilians harder?
The capabilities we have built over the last 20 years have equipped us to be able to do the job relatively well. We have always emphasized that it's not the number of US troops, it's the capabilities that they provide us to do what we need to do. But nonetheless, we're preparing for that zero troops option. There were conditionalities attached to the US-Taliban agreement, and the Taliban have not met that. One of them was a reduction in violence, and we have not yet seen the Taliban to really comply with that, and we are seeing increased number of attacks. It seems like they still think they can take power by force in Afghanistan.
There's an important lesson that's been missed in the British press about what took place with France in May, 3 months before the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. France began evacuating Afghanis working for its embassy and other French organisations, along with their families. Officials said 623 people were flown into France in the weeks before the Afghan army collapsed. The evacuations came in addition to 800 Afghans and relatives who had worked with the French armed forces. The British would not start their evacuation proceedings until the 15th of August.
The Afghan government, UK government and US government and NATO allies followed a similar plan to what took place in Vietnam, known as Vietnamization, which was the training a replacement force for the Afghan government to use against the Taliban once American and NATO allied troops had withdrawn from the area. However, there were a multitude of problems taking place, including civilian casualties from airstrikes increasing in number, including a resurgence in general civilian casualties from both sides. The Afghan army was decreasing in size as each year went on. This was further compounded by the number of terrorist attacks increasing in Afghanistan, which went against the Doha Accords. This put the Afghan government in an extremely difficult position. The US military and NATO allies were leaving the Afghan government to pick up the costs from the US military, and the Afghan government did not have the financial resources to maintain the equipment provided by NATO allies and the United States. Part of the civilian population were now against the United States due to the level of bombing that was affecting civilian populations, and the Taliban were putting pressure throughout the entire country, either through bombings or maintaining controlling areas. This is not the negotiation position that you would want to be in a withdrawal, as exemplified here by Winston Churchill.
When will the lesson be learned? When will the lesson be learned? How many more dictators must be wooed, appeased, good God, given him mixed privileges, before we learn? You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth.
If you are to negotiate peace terms between the Afghan government and the Taliban, one person needs to be in power over the other. And at this point, in 2021, it was clear that the Taliban were in the position of power with control over the country, as well as the fact they were aware that the US military and NATO allies were leaving. The opportunity to negotiate peace had been lost, which is a huge strategic error. The situation was becoming more and more dire by June. We had reports coming out of Afghanistan of the lack of equipment and the ability to maintain that equipment.
تا جمع شدن در مرکز و قدم تیم انجینری خودم قماندانی هست، یعنی اگر وقت امکانش بود کمک میکردن، ولی مشکلاتی یعنی از تیم انجینری یا وسایل مشکلی یا برای ماست. وسایلی خمسا کردن ما این هم بسیار با کمبودی از اون مواجه هستیم.
Do you wish that the Americans had stayed?
بودنشان خوب است، چون نظر به وسایلی پیشرفته نداریم. اینمی یک چیزی است که آن شما با چشم و سر مشاهده میکنین که چیزی نتیجه هم نمیده. زیاد دوستای ما را، زیاد نیروهای امنیتی ما را به شهادت رسانده، فقط ما این زیاد.
On the 2nd of July 2021, Americans left Bagram airfield without notifying the Afghan commander until more than 2 hours after abandoning the base. As a result, the base was ransacked by looters before they could take control of the airfield. 12th of July, the Taliban had seized 139 districts from the Afghan National Army. According to US intelligence reports, the Afghan government was expected to collapse within 6 months of withdrawal. By the 21st of July, half of all districts in Afghanistan were under Taliban control, and the momentum was on the side of the Taliban.
همیشه د افغانستان حکومت له کندهار نه سقوط کړی ده او په دې خاطر دشمن ډیر کوشش په کندهار باندې ده چې دوی کندهار ونیسي دوی دې.
By August 13th, the spiritual home, the former capital to the Taliban, Kandahar, collapses. On August 13th, Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary to the UK, refuses a call from the Afghan Foreign Secretary. He also refuses to return home for a further 2 days. What you're seeing here is the Afghan commander outside of Kabul signing over peace terms and an unconditional surrender to the Taliban. On August 14th, Prime Minister Johnson also decides to go on holiday. On August 15th, President of Afghanistan, Ghani, flees to Turkmenistan. August 15th, Boris Johnson returns from holiday. August 16th, Dominic Raab returns from holiday. By August 17th, the Taliban have entered the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul. On August 17th, Dominic Raab appears on TV trying to justify his actions and says that no one saw this coming.
But no one saw this coming. Of course we would have taken action if we had.
Throughout this period, thousands flee to Kabul airport in order to try and get on any available flights to get out of the country. People were so desperate that they even clung to the side of aircraft. Here you can see in the distance supposedly 2 people falling from the plane, having held on to try and escape the country. In order to clear the runway, attack helicopters from America were used to try and clear it, and scenes at the airport were reminiscent of scenes from Vietnam and the capital of Saigon collapsing to communist forces. Dominic Raab is contradicted by the Prime Minister of Britain, who claims that this was foreseen.
What is not true is to say that the UK government was unprepared or did not foresee this. It's pretty clear from what has happened that the collapse of the Afghan forces has been much faster than expected. And as for our NATO allies and allies around the world, when it came for us to look at the options that this country might have in view of the American decision to withdraw, Mr. Speaker, we came up against this hard reality that since 2009, America has deployed 98% of all weapons released from NATO aircraft in Afghanistan. And at the peak of the operation, when there were 132,000 troops on the ground, 90,000 of them, Mr. Speaker, were American. The West could not continue this US-led mission, a mission conceived and executed in support and defense of America, without American logistics, without US air power, and without American might.
This was considered an odd response as Britain already maintains 2 overseas military bases in Germany. It also ran contrary to British foreign policy, which had recently changed due to Brexit, which was aiming to be a global player, yet has the inability to be able to use its military might to save and protect citizens of Afghanistan. Former Prime Minister Theresa May then went on the attack with the Prime Minister.
What has been most shocking has been the chaos and the speed of the takeover by the Taliban. In July of this year, both President Biden and my right honourable friend the Prime Minister indicated that they did not think that the Taliban was ready or able to take over control of the country. Was our intelligence really so poor? Was our understanding of the Afghan government so weak? Was our knowledge of the position on the ground so inadequate? Or did we really believe this? Or did we just feel that we had to follow the United States and hope that on a wing and a prayer it would be all right on the night? Because the reality is, if I may just make this point, the reality is that as long as a time limit was given and dates were given for withdrawal, all the Taliban had to do was to ensure there were sufficient problems for the Afghan government not to be able to have full control of the country, and then just sit and wait.
By August 24th, the Taliban had stopped all Afghanis trying to reach the airport. On August 26th, 2 suicide bombers exploded themselves outside Kabul airport, killing 92 Afghans, 13 US soldiers, and injuring over 100 people. On August 28th, the British finally leave Afghanistan.
The team here have been working until the very last moment to evacuate British nationals, Afghans and others at risk. Since the 13th of August, we brought nearly 15,000 people to safety, and about 1,000 military, diplomatic, civilian personnel have worked on Operation Pitting in Kabul, many more elsewhere. Thursday's terrorist attack was a reminder of the difficult and dangerous conditions in which Operation Pitting has been done. And sadly, I attended here yesterday the ceremony to pay our respects to the 13 US soldiers who died. It's time to close this phase of the operation now, but we haven't forgotten the people who still need to leave. We'll continue to do everything we can to help them. Nor have we forgotten the brave, decent people of Afghanistan. They deserve to live in peace and security.
A frankly miserable end to an awful war. So many lives were given for the freedom of others, and it's all been torn apart and broken down within no time at all. For the British, so many questions are still up in the air and need to be answered. The responsibility and accountability of the Prime Minister, the responsibility and accountability of the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, and the question over his holiday. One of the strangest things I've found so far is that no one in the media seems to have found out when exactly he went on holiday, and considering Kandahar, the spiritual capital for the Taliban, collapsed to the Taliban on the 12th of August, it begs the question, what was he doing during that period? As well as our generals, Chief of the General Staff Nick Carter and current incumbent Mark Smith, 6 years between them, and yet I've heard nothing from anyone to ask any account to these men. We have questions as to why the government buildings weren't demolished as we evacuated. Why was equipment not destroyed? Why was equipment not just sent over to the Pashtun region, which is against the Taliban? or even into neighbouring Pakistan? Why is the British Prime Minister claiming on the one hand we're a global power and on the other saying we can't afford Afghanistan, and yet he's buying 20 nuclear weapons, which are not frankly usable in any situation? And finally, after that, blood loss. Why didn't we stay and fight? Some big questions to be answered. Thank you to all my patrons. Becoming a member really does help build this movement of spreading the truth. If you'd like to support me, please share the video with others and post about it on social media. If you're keen for more, subscribe, comment, like, and hit that notification button. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on Political X.